Picture this. It's the middle of the night, April 18th, 1912. 40,000 people are standing in the pouring rain in New York, all waiting for a ship called the Carpathia. But this ship wasn't just carrying regular passengers. It was carrying the handful of survivors, and with them, the absolutely chilling story of a ship they called Unsinkable, the RMS Titanic.
It's the question we've all asked, right? It's been over a century, and it still boggles the mind. How did this masterpiece of modern engineering, this floating palace that was the pinnacle of safety, just vanish into the ocean on its first ever trip? Well, today, we're going to break it all down.
You see, before it was a tragedy, the Titanic was a dream. It really was. It wasn't just another ship. It was this huge symbol of confidence, of how much humanity trusted its own technology. The builders, the press, everyone, they didn't just say it was safe. The word they used was unsinkable.
And what a dream it was. I mean, look at these stats. The ship was 269 meters long and as tall as an 8-story building. It was the biggest moving object ever built by human hands at the time. And inside, pure, unadulterated luxury. We're talking grand staircases, a heated swimming pool, a full gym, and even Turkish baths. It was basically a 5-star hotel that could float.
But the real magic, the thing that gave it that unsinkable reputation, was its safety design. Deep in the hull, the ship was divided into 16 separate watertight compartments. Think of it like a giant ice cube tray. The idea was brilliant. If you get a hole in the hull, the water gets trapped in 1 or 2 of those cubes, and the rest of the ship stays perfectly fine and afloat.
In fact, the engineers had done the math. They calculated that the Titanic could literally have the first 4 of its compartments completely filled with water, and it would still not sink. The chances of breaching 4 separate compartments at once? It was considered so ridiculously unlikely, it was basically impossible. For all intents and purposes, this ship was invincible.
But here's the thing about technology. It's only as good as the people running it. And as the Titanic finally set sail, a whole series of seemingly tiny mistakes and bad decisions started to link up, one by one, forming a fatal chain that would drag this dream to the bottom of the ocean.
So what went wrong? Well, for starters, the whole launch was rushed. Titanic's sister ship needed repairs, so they pushed Titanic into service early to keep the money flowing. Then you have the owners, the White Star Line, who were desperate to make headlines by setting a new speed record for crossing the Atlantic. And then, in a last-minute crew change, an officer gets reassigned, and as he leaves, he forgets to hand something over. He walks off the ship with a key still in his pocket.
That one single forgotten key. It sounds so small, doesn't it? But that key was for a locker up in the crow's nest. And what was inside that locker? Binoculars, for the lookouts. Just like that, a tiny little mistake had essentially blinded the men who were supposed to be the eyes of the ship.
Now, fast forward to April 14th, the day of the disaster. The warnings just started piling up. One after another, ships in the area are radioing in, hey, there are massive ice fields directly in your path. Not 1, not 2, but a total of 7 different warnings came in that day. The very last one from the nearby SS Californian was basically screaming at them to stop, and it was just dismissed. The unsinkable ship just kept plowing ahead at full speed into the dark.
So, let's recap the situation. We have a ship with no binoculars for its lookouts, racing at top speed on a moonless night, straight into an area that everyone knows is full of icebergs. The dream was about to have a very, very rude awakening.
And then at 11:40 p.m., it happened. The lookout spots it. A mountain of ice, dead ahead. They try to turn, they try to swerve, but it's just too late. The ship doesn't crash head-on. Instead, the iceberg just grinds along its side, ripping open the hull in the one place it was most vulnerable, right above that celebrated double bottom.
And here it is. This is the knockout blow. Remember that impossible number, the magic number 4? Well, the iceberg sliced open 6 of the watertight compartments. 6. 2 more than the ship could possibly handle. In that very instant, even though the band was still playing on deck, the fate of the Titanic was sealed. It was going down. And this, right here, is what turned a disaster into a horrifying tragedy. You just have to look at the numbers. There were about 2,200 people on that ship, but there were only enough lifeboats for around 1,200 of them. Believe it or not, this was actually legal back then. But it meant that even with a perfect, flawless evacuation, over 1,000 people had absolutely no chance of survival.
The evacuation itself was just pure chaos. Distress signals are going out, but at first, many passengers just didn't believe the ship was really sinking. I mean, it was the unsinkable Titanic. So the first lifeboats were launched half empty. As the front of the ship dipped lower and lower and the stern rose up into the sky, panic finally took over. And then, at 2:20 in the morning, the immense stress on the hull was too much. The giant ship just snapped in half and plunged into the abyss.
But here's one of the most painful parts of the whole story. The tragedy didn't have to be so deadly, because help was so close. And it never came.
Remember the SS Californian, the ship that sent that final ice warning? Well, they had stopped for the night because of the ice. When the Titanic started sending wireless distress calls, the Californian's radio operator was asleep. When the Titanic fired 8 white distress flares into the sky, the Californian's crew saw them, but for some reason, they didn't understand what they were. It was a complete and total failure to communicate.
Just 37 kilometers. That's how close they were. So close they could have reached the Titanic before she sank. So close they could have pulled every single person out of the water. Instead, they just sat there, completely unaware of the horror that was unfolding just over the horizon.
For decades, that seemed to be the whole story, a tragic chain of human error. But the final, crucial piece of the puzzle, it lay hidden for 73 long years, 2.5 miles down at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
And then, on September 1st, 1985, oceanographer Robert Ballard and his team finally found it. There it was, the wreck of the Titanic, broken in two on the seabed. For the very first time, we could actually look at the physical evidence and find out how an iceberg could cause so much damage so incredibly fast.
The investigation quickly zeroed in on one of the smallest, most overlooked parts of the ship, the rivets. Millions and millions of these little metal pins held the giant steel plates of the hull together. You could say the strength of these rivets was the strength of the ship.
And this is where they found the fatal flaw. It turns out, to cut costs and speed things up, the builders used 2 different kinds of rivets. High-quality steel ones for the strong central part of the hull. But for the bow and the stern, they used cheaper, lower-quality iron rivets. And these iron rivets, they were weaker and they became incredibly brittle in freezing cold water.
So when the iceberg scraped along the side, the steel hull plates themselves didn't necessarily rip wide open. Instead, under the immense pressure, those cheap, brittle iron rivets just popped. They snapped one after another, letting the seams of the hull peel open. And the ocean just poured right in, flooding not 1, not 2, but 6 of those watertight compartments.
You see, the sinking of the Titanic was never just one thing. It was this perfect storm, a terrifying cascade of failure, where every single mistake just made the next one worse. It started with the arrogance of an unsinkable design, was pushed forward by the pressure to set a speed record, made possible by a forgotten key, sealed by ignored warnings, and made tragic by a shortage of lifeboats. And all of it enabled by weak, brittle rivets.
And that leaves us with one last, chilling thought to consider. If the builders had just spent a little more money on better quality rivets for the whole ship, would the unsinkable dream have actually come true? Could a tiny choice made years earlier in a shipyard have saved 1,500 people and changed history